Let's turn now to the FBI searching the home of a Washington Post reporter who allegedly obtained and reported on classified information from a Pentagon contractor who's currently in jail. That's according to Attorney General Pam Bondi. The Washington Post identified the reporter as Hannah Natanson. She was at her home in Virginia at the time of the search and was told she was not a target of the probe. Joining me is First Amendment attorney Jeff Lewis of Jeff Lewis Law. Jeff, how unusual is it to execute a search warrant at a reporter's home?
It's very unusual. I'm surprised a judge signed off on such a warrant, given the facts of this case that apparently the leaker has been detained or arrested already. So it's not like there's this hot threat, a time-sensitive threat going on, but rather they have the leaker. They know who he is. So I'm surprised.
According to reports, the government said that she was engaged in a conversation with the leaker involving classified information. Does that make any difference?
Well, the standards the court uses is there an immediate harm to national security? Is the reporter in possession of documents that would violate, like, the Espionage Act? Those are the kinds of the questions that the court looks at, not is a reporter speaking to a confidential source, but is there immediacy? Is there an immediate threat and a grave threat to national security?
There is no law that makes it a crime for a journalist to obtain or publish classified information, but are there any repercussions from the Assange case?
I don't think that the president was criticized as heavily then as the president's being criticized now in terms of the Trump administration, their use of warrants. Because in the Assange case, there's always this assumption, there was always these norms that these materials would be safeguarded, that they'd be only used for purposes of the Assange prosecution and not used for political or purposes to deter reporting. In this case, in this day and age, with concerns about the Trump government's violation of freedom of the press and freedom of speech, people are concerned about the deterrent effect here, and that this seizure was more than just investigating this leaker, but instead was meant to send a signal to anyone who's critical of the Trump administration or communicates with leakers.
Now, the Justice Department has their own regulations about this, and they've been changed under this AG Pam Bondi. Can you explain what the regulations were before and what they are now?
Well, yeah, normally it's the process, especially when you have a search warrant as opposed to an exigent search, that materials seized like this are escrowed, if you will, or embargoed, and they're placed in a secure setting, and they can only be used, the seized materials can only be accessed for a very specific purpose related to the criminal proceeding that the search warrant was issued in. After Bondi took over, I believe those regulations were relaxed such that there's fewer safeguards on what that information can be used for, what the seized devices can be searched for, and there's no escrowing or embargoing of these materials.
What can the reporter do at this point to get her materials back?
Yeah, after the fact, it's hard because the government could have made copies of the image devices, right? The phones and the watch and the laptop. So it's hard for this reporter to have a remedy. She can certainly get her gadgets back, but the invasion, the theft of her information, you'll never undo that. This underscores the needs for reporters to use end-to-end encryption, to turn off face recognition on their phones, to make it as hard as possible for gadgets to be accessed by the government if they're physically seized.
This might be about more than just the classified information. In her reporting, she noted that she had amassed like more than 1,000 sources of federal workers who were frequently communicating with her. And one wonders if, they're looking for more than just classified information related to this one government worker.
Absolutely. Both looking for additional leakers within the government and a deterrent to leakers and a deterrent to reporters for communicating with leakers. There are bigger implications than just one government contractor here.
Is there any way to, impede the government's coming after reporters?
Well, Congress could pass further legislation to restrict the power of judges to issue search warrants. That's one option. Reporters and newsrooms can protect themselves by having policies regarding security for their electronic gadgets and using only end-to-end encryption, software like Signal to communicate with confidential sources, and to only use specific devices when sensitive confidential source information is gathered by news reporters.
Thanks, Jeff. That's First Amendment attorney Jeff Lewis. And that's it for this edition of the Bloomberg